Good afternoon. It's my privilege to welcome you to this session on the demands of public service, and we have four very distinguished public servants here. I'm going to introduce the chair of the session, and then he will introduce his colleagues. It's a particular pleasure, having lived in the Hoosier State for 3 decades, to introduce Lee Hamilton, who is a longtime Congressman from Indiana, served 34 years in Congress, places him as a very rare position to have served the country that long and in such a distinguished way. Currently is president and director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and director of the Center on Congress at Indiana University. Mr. Hamilton's membership and leadership of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs made him one of the nation's true experts in that area. His leadership and experience was again called upon as co-chair of the Iraq Study Group and as vice chair of the 9/11 Commission. Mr. Hamilton delivered the 2004 Wake Forest Convocation Address, and we are honored and delighted to welcome him back to campus.
Well, thank you very much, President Hatch. We thank you for your leadership at Wake Forest, and we all of us thank the university for the extraordinary hospitality that has been extended to us. We're most grateful to you. I did a quick calculation here, and I think the 4 people at the table represent about 65, close to 70 years of public service. So you may not agree with much we say, but you can't accuse us of not having some experience, at least, in the area. I'm Lee Hamilton. I'm president now of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington. I head up a Center on Congress at Indiana University. And it is my very great pleasure to moderate this panel. I don't think the moderator will have all that tough a job, not with the quality of people we've got here. I will introduce them. I will ask them to make their remarks, beginning with Alex here. Fairly brief, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're just going to open it up for questions. I've asked them really to address several questions I hope will be of interest to you. One is, what is public service? It happens up here that all of us who have been in the area of public service have been elected officials. But of course, there are many avenues of public service other than by election to public office. So I hope they'll talk a little bit about what public service is as they understand it and see it, and perhaps more importantly, to speak about the rewards of public service, the satisfactions they have gained as public servants, and to balance the ledger sheet to make sure they talk about some of the frustrations as well. Now the panelists are, first of all, Alice Sink. She is the Chief Financial Officer of the state of Florida. And I learned to my surprise in talking to her last night that that's an elected office. Coming from my state, I kind of assumed that the Chief Financial Officer was an appointed job from the governor, but in her case, elected. And Alex, I think you told me last night that you're the 5th woman in the state of Florida to be elected statewide. So she's really in a very unique category, having been elected as a woman statewide and is now the Chief Financial Officer. She is a cabinet member for the state of Florida. She oversees several thousand employees, and she was at one time in the private sector the president of the largest bank in the state of Florida. So her credentials in this area are simply superb. Her role now is really as a fiscal watchdog to the state of Florida, and Alex, we're delighted to have you. I will introduce the other 2, and then we'll begin with your comments. Also with us today is a mayor, Bill Haslam from Knoxville. He's one of the country's outstanding mayors, has a wonderful reputation not only in his state of Tennessee, but across the Southeast and indeed across the country. Bill has worked as the mayor of Knoxville to try to develop stronger and safer neighborhoods, to provide better city services at competitive pricing, and, of course, improving the job market in that great city of Knoxville, Tennessee. So we are delighted to have Bill with us. He's on the far end here, and he brings a very special perspective to public service, that of mayor. Bill, I've always said that the toughest job in politics is mayor because there's no place to hide. You just walk out, and now Fred can run off to Washington. But if you're mayor, you step out of the door and somebody's banging at you to do something or other, collect the garbage or whatever the problem may be. So I have a very special appreciation of the role of mayor. The other person here sitting to my right, Fred Upton, has had a superb record as a member of the United States House of Representatives. He has been in that House since a very young man of 33 years of age, now going on to his 11th term, I believe Fred said a moment ago. Fred is deeply respected in the House. He's, as we say, he knows his brief whenever he speaks and does his work. He has a tremendous capacity to work across party lines, genuinely bipartisan in so much of the activity that he does. And I think personally he's a tremendous credit to the House of Representatives. He serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He's the top Republican on the Subcommittee on Energy and Air Quality. So if you look at questions like dependence of the United States on foreign oil, the big issues of climate change, and a lot of others, Fred is right in the middle of all of that. So we have a superb panel, and we'll get moving right away, and we will let Alex Sink begin the discussion. Alex?
Thank you, Congressman. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am a Wake Forest alum, so it feels like coming back home, and there's nothing like springtime at Wake Forest. It's absolutely inspiring, and I hope we're all out there recruiting those young juniors in high school that are looking around at our campus over the last few days. I'm happy to be here because my story is probably a little bit different from my fellow panel members. I never dreamt that I was going to be an elected office holder. It was just not something that I ever considered doing. I was always interested in public service from a different aspect. I had a 26-year banking career and retired in the year 2008 and started working on corporate boards and was kind of going in that direction, thinking about the next phase or stage of my life when some friends approached me about running for this new position in Florida. It's a new elected position of Chief Financial Officer. We had, for those of you from other states, we had combined the former elected insurance commissioner with the former elected comptroller and thrown in the state treasurer and the state fire marshal and combined all these positions into one. And it was going to be an open seat. And I started thinking about the job content and realizing that I believed I could bring a lot of my background and my experience to this job as Chief Financial Officer. The only one little problem was that I had to go through an election and raise about $6 million in order to get the job. So it was very much a journey of a 15-month job interview with the people of Florida and convincing my friends to write those all-important checks. And fortunately for me, 2.5 million of them decided that I was the best candidate, and the other 2 million say they voted for me too. But the whole notion of public service, I'm glad you mentioned this because you're certainly still a public servant today in your role. Came about for me because as a business person in Florida, I had the opportunity to serve at the request of many governors and other elected officials and I served as the chair of the Government Accountability to the People Commission. I was the vice chair of Tax Watch, which is a business organization looking at the way tax dollars are spent. I served on the Commission on Education and Improving Education. So when I had to present myself and, well, you've never been elected to anything, and here you are running for a statewide office. We hadn't elected a Democrat in our state for about 10 years. Why me? And it is a very humbling experience to go through that. But some of the rewards have been just absolutely enormous. In my short year or so in office, I just jotted down 2 or 3 things that you wouldn't think maybe that I would be involved in, but risk management. We are a hurricane-prone state, so I've been right at the maelstrom of all the issues about property insurance and how much risk do we as Florida citizens want to bear versus how much should be off in the private sector. We've been involved in a lot of consumer protection activities. In our state, we have a lot of seniors, so we're finding a lot of agents are selling inappropriate annuity products to seniors, and so we're working on legislation to protect those seniors, but at the same time not to overregulate. I sit as a member of this, Lee mentioned, as a part of the 4 statewide elected officials in Florida. So we have 12 agencies reporting to us, including a $140 billion pension fund, which is the 4th largest pension fund in the country. And we've had some problems getting caught up in the subprime and the structured investment vehicle and all that mess. We had a run on one of our funds. We had to shut it down. And because the governor and the attorney general who serve with me are both attorneys, they don't have any experience. I found that my financial experience was really meaningful and important in that decision-making process. And then lastly, I've gotten very heavily involved in issues of climate change. And you're trying to think, well, what does the chief financial officer have to do with climate change? And actually, there's a very important link here because climate change is going to have and is already having financial impacts on making determinations about what kind of stocks and companies do you want to invest in. I keep telling everybody we don't want to be invested in 8-track tape companies or buggy whip companies. We want to be forward-thinking about our equity investments for our retirees down the road. Or certainly when insurance companies are thinking about impacts of sea level change or droughts or fires, climate change is being factored into how they do their rate structures. And for us in Florida, mitigation, hardening our homes against hurricanes is very important. So it's somebody asked me how it was, and I said I thought I would go to Tallahassee and spend 3 days, maybe 3 or 4 issues a week that were meaningful, and instead it's 3 or 4 every day. So it's quite challenging, but rewarding and satisfying. And lastly, I just wanted to mention we talked in yesterday's forum a little bit about balancing your life between your professional life, your community life, and your personal life. And certainly being in the public eye, we have very liberal open records laws in Florida. And so for me, having been in the private sector for so long, to throw myself into an environment where every word I say, every email that's sent, every piece of paper that comes into my office is subject to be printed in the newspaper, leaves you wide open to all sorts of shenanigans and bad stuff, but it does keep you honest. And balancing the world of my children and my husband and all of my other interests certainly proves to be a tremendous challenge, much more so than when I was in the private life. So I'll stop there.
Alex, thank you. You got us off to a very, very good start. Fred, why don't you pick it up from there?
Well, a couple things. I, like Alex, never ever had a dream of running for public office. I graduated from University of Michigan with a degree in journalism. I wanted to cover the Cubs and the Bears and the Wolverines and the Spartans and the ACC, the big challenge. And I met a young man that was running for Congress, and I volunteered to help him. I was impressed with him. It was right after Watergate. There were many of us in college back then that were very disillusioned with the way that things were not working in Washington. The Vietnam War was part of that. My dad thought I was crazy. I'd go to a great school like Wake Forest and volunteering for someone and not getting paid and working for a guy that didn't have a ghost of a chance of winning because he was running against an incumbent. And make a long story short, he won. I went to Washington for the first time in my life. I had never been there before, and it was a great job. It was making a difference for lots of people. The guy that I worked with was really a policy wonk in every respect. Constituents, they could meet with somebody else, and that was often me. I got to go home. As much as I wanted, my folks still live across the street from me back in Michigan now, and I was the go-to guy. So whether it was working with a school, a university, a county commissioner, a state rep, all of those projects, I was the one that did the behind-the-scenes work to get them done. And after 4 years, I'd mastered the challenge, thinking about law school. That was before computers. I went into the office, the Longworth building. Lee, I don't know if you were in that office, in that building, working on my typewriter on my resume the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend. And the phone rang, and it was Governor Reagan. He had been elected but not sworn in yet. I, of course, recognized his voice when I picked up the phone. He offered my boss a job at the White House in the cabinet. I sort of took my resume, threw it into the trash, and went down to the White House to work, where I had really 4.5 years of running congressional affairs, working members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. And you got to remember, back then we were a minority. Republicans were like they are today. I think we had maybe 140, 150 Republican votes out of 435, and in the Senate we were in the minority and majority both, with Bob Dole there. But I really got the legislative experience and learned very quickly that if, particularly as a Republican, to get things done, you had to reach to the Democrats. Then, make a long story short, met my wife, fell in love, met my wife, fell in love, got married, and again, no desire to think about Congress. And folks from my hometown called and said, Fred, we need you back here. We need a lot of help. The guy that's in the Congress just isn't pulling his weight. And I said no. And they called again a couple months later, and we went back and decided to run. And yes, I ran against an incumbent and beat him in a primary, the only one to lose in the country, in 1986. And when I first went to Washington, I remember sitting down with our leadership, Jack Kemp, Lynn Martin, and others, and Lynn Martin, who was in charge of the Republican conference, one of our top office holders from Chicago. She said this. She said, if you have a good idea, two things are going to happen. It's either going to get beat or it's going to get stolen. You'll never get anything done. And I said, not me. And so I reached across the aisle. That's been my MO. And I can remember one of my first pieces of legislation was to bring a tax credit for small businesses that had to make structural changes to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I've got 218 co-sponsors. Lee was one of them. And once that got done, Dan Rostenkowski came up to me and grabbed me and said, we're going to put that into this bill. You need to vote for it. I said, not a problem. But that has been my MO. And when I was in the minority, and that was the first number of years in the Congress, and then in the majority, and then now back in the minority, I have always reached across the aisle. And every bill that I do has strong bipartisan support. As an example, a bill that I'm going to introduce this next week. Wake Forest, I know, just started my daughter told me this, she's a student here, Wake Forest University Emergency Alert System, WFU Emergency Alert. Well, I was chairman of the Telecommunications Subcommittee, and I think it's very important, particularly with the new technologies, that our schools, all schools, not only universities, as we saw with Virginia Tech, but also with K through 12 schools, that they have the ability to communicate not only with the student body, but also with the parents in terms of if there is something that's going on campus. Maybe you've got a school closing because of weather. Maybe you've got, tragically something like we saw in Colorado, and that anniversary is coming up this next month with Columbine. But you've got to have a way to communicate with folks. We have the means to do it. We don't necessarily have the funds to do it. Or we have the technology, but not the means. So I'm introducing a bill this next week with Bobby Rush, an African-American from the south side of Chicago. He's on my committee. We're very close friends. It's going to be the Rush-Upton bill because he's a Democrat and they're in power instead of Upton-Rush, even though it's my idea. But it's going to be the Rush-Upton bill, and we're going to use the E-rate so that schools across the country can use those funds and be able to alert their students. This job is about making a difference. I mean, that's why I ran. I never had a desire to run for Congress until I actually did. No dream. But you really can make a difference by discovering problems and figuring out a solution that's there. I'm going to have a very wonderful meeting in about 2 weeks. One of the fellows, we're able to meet wonderful people like former colleagues like Lee and others, terrific scientists, university presidents, people from all around the world. I met what I think is probably the next, he already is, he's the Thomas Edison of this century. His name is Dean Kamen. He invented already the Segway, he invented the kidney dialysis mobile machine. He's invented a machine that with an amputee, maybe who's lost his arm somehow, you could put a glove on this arm and you would not be able to tell that it's not a real arm in terms of connecting it to the nerve muscles that's there and being able to operate in a normal way. He's developed a new machine that purifies water. It will literally purify 250 gallons a day from even raw sewage with virtually no electricity. It will run off cow dung, the methane from the cow dung, to make it work. It costs about $1,500 a machine. Can you imagine the impact in Africa or South America where literally millions of people die of cholera, malaria, all these different things? And so he came and impressed me to no end, and he wants to donate this. He's not going to, royalties or anything. He just wants it done. But he just needs about $50 million. So you can imagine how many of these devices you can send around the world. So I've set up a meeting. He's going to meet with the ranking member, top Republican on the Foreign Affairs subcommittee that funds these things, and the president of the World Bank. They brag that they've spent billions of dollars trying to purify water. Well, they're not doing it on something like this. And for $50 million, you can make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And just think about the U.S.'s in terms of what the reaction of the United States is for bringing these machines to villages, whether they be in Bangladesh or someplace else. So that's the reward of this job. You can really, with a little bit of thought and idea and oomph, get something done, particularly if you work in a bipartisan way. Now, the frustration clearly is your family. I mean, I'm in Michigan every week, and I'm lucky that my kids were both born since I was elected, so they've never had anything different. But I've always thought if you put your family first, and we do have a lot of quality time, and your job comes second, the campaign can be a distant third, because if you do the 1 and 2 right, you shouldn't have to worry about your campaign, and if not, then your priorities are in a different place, quite frankly, and life is too short. So I've been lucky, but that frustration of maybe not being there for a school play or a sporting event or a variety of different things because I'm one place and they're the other. We made the decision early, and I don't know, Lee, when you were elected at about the same age, I think, we made the decision that my wife was from Baltimore and her family was there, her brother still lives there, that our kids would go to school in Virginia, not politically correct. It's better that they're in Michigan, but I said, you know what, I can at least do carpool in the morning and scoot home for some of these events, at least during the week, and they spend some time in Michigan, certainly during the summer. But, that's the biggest frustration, because this is a 24/7 job. There's no question about that. Most mornings for me start before 6 and end at 9 or 10, and it's certainly like that back in Michigan, where I'll be tomorrow, and where it snowed 4 inches yesterday as well. So, but it's a pleasure to be here. I'm very proud of Wake Forest. Great faculty. I attended a class today. Got an 80 on the spot quiz as well. I thought, and I'd never taken anthropology either. So anyway, it's a delight to be here.
Okay, Fred. As Fred was talking, I couldn't help but think about the statement Speaker O'Neill once, Fred was describing his modus operandi, and he's very good at working across the aisle, but he's also very good at letting other people share the credit. And Tip O'Neill was famous for many reasons, but among others, he said that you can get an awful lot done in Washington if you simply let somebody else take the credit. And Fred has operated in that manner. We smile sometimes when we hear that, but it's a very, very important part of personal relations and getting things done. Okay, Bill, you're the cleanup hitter now. Yeah. Let's go to work. Make the mayor work a little bit here. Thank you, Bill.
Sure. Unlike Fred and Alex, I did think that I might run for office someday. I just never dreamed it would be mayor, to be honest with you. My background comes from, I've been in business all my life until I was elected 5 years. I had to laugh when you said there's a combination of 66 years of service up here. Alex and I are kind of like Steve Kerr when he and Michael Jordan were the guards for the Bulls, and they averaged 42 together, you know. We're Steve Kerr, and you all are Michael Jordan. So, but I'd been in business all my life. Really, two things. Had been in a business that owned 300 truck stops spread across the country, and then spent time also building the internet retail business for Saks Fifth Avenue online. You see the combination between truck stops. I'm sure you'd get that. But somewhere in there, somebody came up to me like they did to Alex and Fred and said, would you think about running for mayor? And I said no, because while I'd thought about running for office, and I can say this here, don't tell anybody at home, I just didn't think being mayor of Knoxville was all that big a deal. Again, this is taped, I'm in trouble already. And it just didn't feel like something that's what I'd want to give a considerable part of my life for, and to go through the trouble of running for office and raising money. But over a period of time, I started to reevaluate that. One of the things that made me do that was I'm on the board of an organization called World Vision that does relief and development work in some of the poorest countries in the world. Raise $2 or $3 billion every year, wonderful people working in really hard places. And I would see the funds raised, and I'd see how much of it, despite great people with great intentions, wasted's too strong a word, but it was hard to put to work effectively because of the government in that country. We could do all the great work you wanted to, but if the government was going to not set up great health systems or great education systems, we were working on the margins. And so it began to occur to me that, if government was important there, it was important where I lived as well. And I'd spent a lot of my business career being, the chair of the United Way and the Art Museum and the, several boards for youth at risk type folks. And I thought, I'm doing all that because I really care about where I live, and I want to see if I can make a difference. And I became convinced that maybe that would be the best way for me to make a difference, would be to run for local office. And of the decisions I've made in my professional life, that's the best one I've made by far. You talk about the rewards of public service. It was really what both of you all put your finger on. You really can change things. We can focus on a blighted neighborhood that's seeing disinvestment and folks moving out and houses being boarded up, and change that neighborhood around and change the living circumstances of folks. Or we can focus on the economic climate of town and recruit corporations that are going to bring in jobs that are going to be the right jobs for us for the next decade. And I can go on and on through that. The rewards, quite frankly, are even more than I thought they would be. I love doing what I do now. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago when I first considered this, would I like this as much as I do, I'd say, well, I bet you'll like it some, and it'll be rewarding and all that. But I love it because it is an incredible chance to make a difference. And I'll say this for students out there who are thinking about running for something, you do tend to think, well, I'm going to run for Congress or I'm going to run for a statewide office, all of which are great. But the joy of local government is you can push somewhere and you can see the result come out the other end. And not that long of a period of a time, you can make a real impact. So there's incredible rewards to that. The demand, I would say, the downside is this. Unlike in business, where you have the discipline of the market that is going to tell you what to do, in government, there is a myriad of great ideas. And if I said, how many people think we should build more sidewalks in the city so that your kids can all walk to school? That's a great idea. Should we have more? Should we have a larger police force to keep things safe? Yeah, that's a great idea. Should we pay our firefighters more? Yeah, they risk our life. I mean, I could go on, and I'd through a list, and I'd say, has anybody heard a bad idea? And you'd go, no. And I'd say, okay. Now, how many people want to raise your taxes? And no hands would go up. So the difficulty in government is all about determining priorities among competing valid interests, and that's the hard part. It's deciding between a lot of decisions. It's really no different than a university or a church or a lot of things. The ideas that come to us aren't bad. They're mostly all good ideas, right? It's deciding, well, we have to live in a realistic world, and there's not a market out there picking one decision over the other. So I think that's the first difficulty. The second is that you have to be used to living the life of a football coach. All of you all have sat in the stands at an athletic event of some type and thought, why is he playing him? Why did he make that call? And if you aren't willing to do business in public where you're being evaluated constantly, then you probably aren't going to like the life of public service, because everybody in Fred's district has an opinion about him, one way or the other. They just do, because they've been around. I like him, I don't like him, he's okay, but you have to become comfortable with that. The third thing I think I'd point out in terms of the demands would be particularly local, and it's what Lee brought up. One thing about being mayor, it's a hands-on job, and people can put their hands on you. I'd been elected for about 2 months, and my predecessor had been in office for 16 years. And so there's a whole backlog of people who had been told no, who thought, oh boy, there's a fresh guy in here, and we can go get a yes where we've heard no forever. President Hatchett might have been like that when you came to the university. It's like, oh, good, And so all the people that had been told no came in. And about 2 months into it, I'm sitting in my desk kind of backed up to the reception area, and I could hear there was somebody out there saying, I want to speak to the mayor. And the receptionist, this wonderful woman, said, I'm sorry, he's busy. It went back and forth. I know he's back there. Let me speak to him. He's busy, blah, blah. And finally, I heard him kind of pound her table and said, I want to speak to the mayor, and I won't speak to anyone lower than the mayor. And it took all my restraint not to lean around the corner and say, there is no one lower than the mayor. Because it is that nature of job. But that's, like I said, that's the downside. The good side is, because it's a hands-on job, you really can make a lot of things happen. So I'll stop there and go back to Lee.
Well, thank you very much, each of you. You've made a good contribution. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to try to sum up for you very quickly some of the points that stood out to me as they were making their comments. On the reward or benefit side, did you notice how many times they use the phrase make a difference? I think all three of them used that phrase, and it is quite clear that to them, as a public servant, it was a very important personal satisfaction that they were able to make a difference somewhere. You've got a legislator here, you have two executive branch people, a mayor and a financial officer. You also have local, that's the mayor, state, that's Alex, and federal. So you've got quite a cross-section here. But the idea of making a difference, doing something that counts. My guess is that every young person in this room, and maybe the older people too, would like their life to make a difference. That is, you want to try to do something important in your life. And they have said here in their own personal testimony that they have an opportunity to do that. I don't mean to speak disrespectfully here of other pursuits, but I find a lot of my friends and in other areas get into jobs that bore them. And they do not feel a sense of importance about the task that they do when they get up in the morning. I think one of the great advantages of public service is you get up every single morning and you say to yourself, I've got important work to do today. And believe you me, that's a motivator, isn't it? It really is a motivator. So I was impressed the way they talked about making a difference. I was also impressed with their comments about the importance of the issues that they're dealing with. Alex was talking about risk management and climate change and consumer protection. Fred was talking about the bills that he is introducing and working on. You really do get a sense, I think, in public service that you are working on something important for people, and that's a source of satisfaction, too. Now, I was also impressed on some of the negatives of public service. Family time, Fred mentioned. No doubt about that, is there? I mean, I don't know of a single public servant who doesn't have in the back of their mind somewhere a little bit of a feeling of guilt because they're not giving enough time to their families. And so when a person retires from public office, I know you get a little cynical about this. You'll read about, I'm retiring because I want to spend more time with my family. You ever heard that one? Well, it's true in part. There may be other reasons as well, of course, but it is true in part because I could list for you, I don't think I want to do it, but I could list for you dozens of events that my wife was very upset with me because I didn't make a PTA meeting of importance or a ball game or an award that was given in the second or third grade or something of that sort because the House was in session, you know. So that is a big frustration. Alex mentioned something very, very quickly. She didn't expand on it, but I think all of them would agree. Money raising's a pain, isn't it? I mean, it really is a pain. Mm-hmm. But unless you come from a very wealthy family, you have to do it. And it is a lot of effort. I was never, after 30 years of doing it or more, ever comfortable in going before a group and saying, please give me some money for re-election. I wasn't any good at it, for one thing. I didn't enjoy doing it for another. But it is a chore. And I don't know, what did you say, $6 million? Oh, gee, I can't even think of that. $6 million raising money to run for the chief financial officer. Just let that play on your mind a little bit, and you see some of the disadvantages. Bill was talking about the criticisms you have to take. And that's something, if you're considering public service, I think you've got to really weigh. Can you take criticism? And some of it pretty harsh. If you cannot, well, forget public service, because you're going to get it. No matter how good you may be, and we all think we're pretty good, decent people, you're going to get some criticism. And you have to learn to take that criticism. You try to learn from it, I think. Most of us try to learn from it, but you also get some very mean-spirited criticism. That is hard to take, but it's one of the disadvantages. Maybe you can turn it into an advantage if you handle it properly. And of course, Bill mentioned too the unrelenting aspect of public service. I used to make lists. You ever do this? Make lists of things you're supposed to do, and then you sit there and check them off. Most people do that. I do it. What happens in public service is you can never check everything off. You've always got a few more things to do. And you never, ever get to the point where you can sit down and say to yourself, I'm caught up.